Okay, so it shows that it's streaming. I'm gonna go onto the.
It's saying that it's going.
Yep, I'm gonna go to the back end of the YouTube. And then I will make sure that it's working. Sometimes it lags like 2 minutes.
Shows that it's streaming.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we're actually streaming. You'll have to go to your Google, that like Chrome browser, and then you'll just have to exit out of that because it's going to.
Okay. Shows that it's streaming. Oh, okay, yeah. So we're actually streaming. You'll have to go to your.
Just kill the Chrome or Safari or whatever it is.
Out of that. Okay, yeah. So we're actually streaming. You'll have to go to your.
Just kill the Chrome or Safari or whatever it is.
Out of that.
Great.
Is it me?
Yeah. So you have a Chrome browser open, or the YouTube is open on another browser behind. Yeah, Marcelo, what it does is when you start streaming, in the same way that the pop-up of the put in the information, it opens up the live stream.
Okay.
And it automatically starts recording. Yeah, I can't hear myself anymore, so I think we're good.
Yes. Okay.
Awesome. And then I see on the back end too that the link is working, everything's live. Is it? Can I check something quick?
Let's see.
Okay, I just tested the link tree as well. So everything is up and running, feeding to the stream.
Okay, great. I see the Guillermo. I think Maxi should be.
And then the last thing to just make sure is that you record the session as well.
So what was the last thing that you said?
Yeah, just to record it. It should be another button on the bottom.
Right.
And then we are rocking and rolling.
Yes.
Thanks for bearing
Marcelo,
with it.
Yes.
Marcelo, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, yes. I hope it's not about YouTube or streaming or anything like that, but.
Can you optimize the, no. I wanted to ask you.
No,
do you,
yeah. Okay, but we should be doing that, I think, Emily, are you doing that? No, go ahead, Daniele, go ahead.
Was there any space in the prompt of the studio in terms of when you started so close into the design of a furniture and the design of the space of learning? Was there any conversation at all in terms of like what is being taught, or how are we teaching, or what does that sort of the space of the individual person teaching in learning in a school looks like, or what do they do? Or because sometimes I see devices, sometimes I see screens, sometimes I see pieces of paper and pencils. Is it just sort of like entourage for the sake of entourage, or is there like a story there that you're looking to mine moving forward in the project?
I mean, it's a good point. Okay, I think first of all, I think this was not a, I think a lot of people have said this. We didn't want to make this a COVID studio. I mean, like just too specific of a problem. The idea, I mean, Maya kind of hinted to this, the idea of like teaching outside and so on. I think if you were to see, maybe Florencia is looking at more like segregated classrooms and so on. In our studio, we had a much more, I mean, I don't know why I say typological, but kind of formal massing idea of how you will actually look at in the context of building, in the context of certain known types of building. Now, the specifics of, let's say, the idea of like build pedagogy, or the idea of how you actually build through the architecture, an idea of maybe pedagogy. We talked a little bit about it in terms of like what it means, at least in elementary education. And I've used the example of my own daughter's school, where they use a lot they use the floor a lot, they use carpets, there isn't a hierarchy in the room as there used to be when I went to school, where the teacher was always in one place. I mean, there were discussions about it, but of course, I mean, some of these things maybe take a kind of backseat to designs, to trying to make something look cool, to designing interesting objects. I mean, I do think it's a fair conversation. I do think if there's an opportunity, maybe, one could connect the dots of like something that is cool looking, it has a sort of aesthetic value, but also kind of goes in a direction that somehow it's not, it doesn't sort of like incarnates all notions of, how we should educate, especially young children and so on. So, I mean, ideas of like, bringing enough natural light into the space and, so on and so forth, those things should be definitely part of, they should be part of the discussion. Maybe the students are not talking about it, but certainly it's one of the considerations. Okay, it's gonna get late for you guys, and it's going to get late for everyone. Maybe Kyle, can I ask you to see if we can get Sean Cooper from the other review? I don't, I mean.
Yeah, I can go over there and tell him to come over.
Thank you. Anyway, so Emily, we have now we have 3 more pairs. We're being joined by Juan Rincon, who's there. You see a guy who looks like Benicio del Toro. That's touche.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Juan.
Good afternoon. I am Shradda. My project has been derived from the modern chair by Gropius. At a glance at the chair, you will see it's a simple design of sticks with sophisticated colors. Same has been derived to form a line of furniture to suit a elementary school's environment by using terrazzo and marble to attain its overall composure. The final form of the chair further supported the idea of fuzzy aggregate objects. A sense of dominance to holds its idea of modernism or space has been established by its homogeneous shape. The idea of curves to explain the space for kids, or the idea of deformed shape, which is defining the current architectural style, is what I want to question in this project. And the division of space as an individual and summation of the same individual form has resulted into this dominant mass. The mass further controls the landscape the landscape. Like the landscape is growing over the structure. The classrooms are placed one above the other, which is governing the negative spaces it's creating, further controlling the land it's in. The structure is dominating the site, people, users in ways by letting the green spaces go around it. A courtyard is now a negative space formed by the cantilever classroom. An outdoor space is no more the traditional park. Instead, you may find yourself walking over the structure. This uh, this overall segregation of spaces might make you realize how much the mass in itself is having control over you. So this is what I thought of. This is what I thought modern chair-back groupes attends its presence in any place it's placed in. Thank you.
Thank you, Shradda. Kate, I see you.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name's Kate. With inspiration taken from Eames's molded plywood chair, my design focuses on the aggregation of malleable surfaces and linked curves to make an ambiguous whole, as the toy on the desk implies. This is translated into the form of the furniture that make up the classroom. While trying to emulate the beauty and the simple curves of the chair, I focused my design around only a few molded surfaces that interlock to make a whole. These pieces sit together in a series of simple volumes that make up each classroom, which are furthermore hidden with a series of interlocking roofs. Each classroom layout, while containing the same elements, differ from each other. And each classroom also has an adjoining exterior space defined by the roof. These spaces come together as a sort of village, creating tight and intimate spaces to gather. And these gathering spaces can be used seamlessly with the interior spaces. So from above, you can gain glimpses of the exterior spaces that mirror the volumes, but the volumes remain mostly undefined. They remain separate and come together only through the roof, and without the roof, the interior spaces would be exclusive to each other.
Thank you, Kate and Shradda. Emily, is there any way to move this window out or somehow move like?
Yeah, you click on the first two arrows that are pointing towards each other on the bottom. Yeah.
Okay.
So Shradda, I'm sorry, I'm probably saying your name wrong. You seem to have made some smart moves going towards the fourth and fifth exercise, or wherever it is. 1, 2, I should be able to count it out, right? 1, 2, 3, yeah, fourth and fifth, of course. So that I think the sort of inversion of the furniture's mega articulation into a kind of element that can remove or produce a kind of texture in the facade, I think was a successful decision. And then it seems like the next decision that you might make is about the massing as a whole. So whether these elements remain something that, you know, we can sort of, let's say, read the stacking of those, or how you might begin to sort of blur that through potentially the texture as an element that can obscure it. And that might be compounding some of that, or through the massing, introducing some of the qualities and behaviors of the sort of piles that you make in your initial furniture to produce irregularities like some kind of oblique surfaces that would come into the system. Seems possible. Kait, in your project, I could mistake the elements. You know, there is obviously a scalar interplay in these projects, but it's like almost looking at a #2 pencil because of the color that you've selected, and one which is all of a sudden bent. It's really great. I'll remember, there's a really great painting that has this kind of bent pencil in it at the Kemper Museum here in St. Louis. Maybe I'll send it to you privately in the chat if I find it. And I think your decisions, as I look at your two projects, I think like the maison jaoul effect that you get out of your roof is really fantastic. And even in the kind of volumetric outcomes of that, as we start to move through the project. I wonder how the elevation might be where we're not sort of in the interior of the project, you know, in these kind of courtyard conditions that you're producing. And I would say the strength of your project is predominantly in those volumes, in the roof. And how might you think about the elevation, the sort of face out to the city? Maybe that's an opportunity for these things to unify. I think the elevation will be, let's say, more challenging. I know you're not designing in elevation, but in fact, you know, it's always going to be relatively linear in the projects in a sort of single stack. So how might you scenographically think about other layers or elements that start to compact in that view? And I think your roofscape could certainly play a role in that through, so I can't tell entirely, and I would look at your projects in elevation some to make judgments about them. But that seems to be a challenging view in all of the projects, to sort of introduce some kind of face to the city, or something that plays a kind of public role in the project.
I would say, I mean, I find very interesting both projects. I hope I'm not jumping on maybe certain comments that have already been discussed in the previous projects. The logic of both projects in which the language or the final language of the building we're seeing ends up being a result of a continuance addition or multiplication of, let's say in this case, an element that operates at a quite different scale as the chair itself. I find it super compelling with both projects, especially second project, the way the parts start to relate and create these conversations with one another ends up deriving in quite sort of a different, let's say, learning environments, which I imagine has been sort of a discussion you've had before. And in that sense, I think it opens quite an interesting window. Nevertheless, something that I haven't really been able to relate in a way in both projects is how do we expand this notion of the reconfiguration or the re-understanding of the learning space, especially in a place like LA, with the considerations of LA, where we can actually expand into the exterior, no? And actually sort of erase that blur, not that blur, but that sort of frontier or those limits, no? Understanding that the learning environments tend to be indoor, no? And in that sense, especially the first project, Shradda, you talk about vegetation, no? You talk about vegetation as a sort of external, in a way, perimetrical element that complements all this logic of being able to walk around the structure in the roofs or so on. I think the vegetation in that sense for this project could be kind of a key element or a sort of bridge in really understanding it in the same complexity as you've understood sort of this disaggregation of the chair as the element, but rather more in a more, let's say, rigorous way or a similar protocol as that one, more than just the layout of certain blocks. No, maybe if you further elaborate on this, this could be an element that bridges that condition between the exterior and the interior in a more pedagogical way, let's say, in the possibilities of this building to operate as different, in a different set of learning environments that are not necessarily or merely understood within the logic of the interior, no? I feel that comment applies also to Kait's project. There's a lot of richness in this topography, no, that your roof is deriving from, and I feel it could operate in more levels than the ones we're seeing we're seeing right now. I feel all this sense of levels, kind of slides or so on, can create relationships of pedagogical encounters that normally do not happen in the interior, because in the interior we tend to segregate a little bit, no? But here there could be a way to connect learning environments within the exterior, no? So maybe there could be a layer in making this, the richness, no? And the complexity of this room, of these roofs, as sort of key points that can relate learning environments from one another, but that are separated from certain distances and that are separated themselves by certain movements you've done in the roof itself. So I think both projects I really appreciate, and I find super convincing a little bit the protocol of how you have been sort of disaggregating a more simple, let's say, element as the chair. Now when I see the whole project itself, I feel there are a lot of opportunities on how to explode those protocols and really start designing relation possibilities within the exterior.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like this comment about negotiating the overall organization between interior and exterior, and possible sort of spaces of negotiation that the project may engage with moving forward. I think that the first one, Shradda's interior images, or tension, I should say, between interior materialities, interior sort of eclecticism, and the sort of the more muted exterior very much speaks about the opportunities that that you may think of in terms of how what are the boundaries, what are the thresholds that your project wants to work with. And I think that I mean, now that Juan, is that your name? Is that correct? Juan Ricardo?
Juan. Yeah.
Juan.
Yeah.
So like Juan was suggesting, I think something that sort of came up to mind during his comment was there is like a shadow of an element that I think you all will have to somewhat deal with after in the next step, which is kind of the boundary of this environment of teaching, of learning. Because right now, all of this sort of we see them as sort of floating islands. They become sort of their own inner worlds, not unlike the interior of the first scale that you worked on. But I think it's going to be really exciting to start thinking about the threshold, not only between interior spaces of learning and exterior spaces of encounter, but also the exterior of the institution towards, like, I don't know, all of the questions of policing and control of like public spaces versus exterior spaces. And so to be able, in the first project, I think it was really exciting to find multiple ways of navigating from exterior into all the way to the interior with the figure of this courtyard, that then once again sort of mirrors some of the
Jorge, please mute yourself.
Sorry.
Marcelo, you can mute him. Oh, there you go.
Great. So
sorry.
Wonderful.
I mean, sorry, gotta get my mask on. People going through my house. I like the first project. I can't pronounce your name. Sorry, I'm pretty bad at this. I think both these projects are bring the notion of the grain, right? Perhaps from their furniture studies or from the representation of that furniture, there is a certain grain direction that begins to activate the different spaces, or perhaps present a different way of reading them that appears both in the roof in Kate's project and in the ground in the first project. The first project in particular, to me, I like it because it's very difficult to read from what we understand as a whole right now, or this group of 8 classrooms, where each classroom begins and ends. It's a little bit of a kind of fortress, right? And I'm saying that in the kind of in the good sense, right? I mean, it's impermeable to a one-to-one meaning between parts and mass, or parts and whole. And that I do like. I think the product doesn't just repeat itself and equates that notion of repetition with the whole. So I think, to me, there are a lot of interesting spatial qualities, and I like these kind of sunken voids that exist there. In Kate's project, I mean, I really like the idea of the bolted roofs, the kind of figural bolted roofs, and the kind of seeming like sweeping or extrusion of those bolts in different directions to create this landscape of roofs. Perhaps the way these striations are composed, as the product begins to grow to encompass more classrooms, we will need to recalibrate a little bit the length of these sweeps or extrusions in a way. I hope that it just doesn't, that you don't just take clusters of classrooms and begins to aggregate them, because I think that in and of itself will begin to like kind of, create more noise for the project. But I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking of the Kimball Art Museum. I'm thinking of projects that use the kind of bolted roof as a main mode of organizing program. And I think here, perhaps the project's been a little shy about the extension of these things. They all get, cut off very quickly around clusters of classrooms, and perhaps you can begin to extend those things as canopies or as, you know, producing all the things that is not necessarily strictly interior space.
Yeah, maybe just as a quick-ish add-on to that. I mean, these are already really beautiful projects. I mean, for midterm, that's already really impressive. And I do think, yeah, the sort of, it's like, I want to say linearity, but I know they're not necessarily linear projects. But how you're starting to interpret that for yourself, I think is quite successful. Kate, in your case, and maybe that could be at least the beginning of an answer to what Maxi is asking for. There might be a moment of thickening. Like there's this moment, this relief that you're showing where the roof kind of overhangs over the volumes, like starting to think about what the thickening could contain. So how do you start thinking that further through? Like right now you were talking about the sort of folded surfaces, but that can also have another thickness, right? And how that then starts at some moments turn into ground or turn into larger massings, I think could be quite interesting and productive when you start thinking about another scale change. And then Shradda, in your project, I mean, I mean, while I completely agree with Max's observations of the larger project proposal right now, I do really like the second step that you did. There, the one on the bottom left, under the pencil close-up. I mean, there's something really suggestive about the play between background and foreground that you're losing a little bit with just translating everything into solid, where there might be a moment where everything becomes thinner again and less sort of monolithic and thick. Sick, yeah, you know what I mean. It's too late. My German accent is starting to come through. That's when we know. I'm getting to the end of this. No, but the sort of like veil and play between background and foreground that you have in this image, I wonder if there's a moment where you can play with that a little bit more in the actual project proposal, where certain moments become a little bit more porous and other moments become a little bit more solid. And what does that mean in the larger sort of translations, especially when you move one scale up, right?
There. Oh, sorry, I was muted. Okay. I see John Cooper. So, hey, John, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Marcelo. Thanks.
Okay, I think we're going to, I mean, unless there is any other comment, we're going to move on. Okay, guys? So thank you, Shradda, and thanks so much, Kate. You know, great work, guys. Okay. So the jury was introduced earlier, so, but yeah. Okay, so let's see, Yuxing and then Linjun, okay?
Hi, this is Yixin, and this project mainly explores the idea of hidden dimension, I call, and that inspired by Eric Serening's warm chair. I'm interested in how spaces can give hints to encourage kids to invent their behaviors as they are learning from the environment. And like this makeup furniture, and kids might slide down from the sloping surface, figure out how to use them. Also, there are a number of recessed corners for kids to hide and so forth. So the idea is that in this classroom, kids play around in a landscape consisting of sloping elements like furniture and corner to explore their curiosity. And a classroom unit has two recessed spaces in opposite ends that helps bring all units together in a new collective forms. Here we can see how these classrooms aggregate together through the unit design, not only define outdoor space, but also give this assemblage a sense of monolithic. In further aggregation, this assemblage opens up possibility to create pocket-like backyard as well as underground level. Here we can see two sunken plaza connecting with underground spaces and extending to shared pocket-like backyards, form a new whole assemblage that can keep growing. Within all these elements, diverse niches are built, revealing the hidden dimension for kids' curiosity to explore their own understanding to the environment.
Hi, this is Linjun. My furniture studies start from Chelsea Longo, designed by Le Corbusier, and the way I study and I assemble the furnitures, it's kind of like a Lego, and it creates like randomly assembled together, but the avoids and the curvatures is quite interesting. And this is the piece of furniture I designed before. And then I find out like different furnitures overlaid together can create a continuity, like two classroom, like the video going through like two classrooms can create more communicate for the child. And this is the way how I assemble, like create a kind of the similar idea that before. And this is like the like how experiencing going through like the halos that creates on the kind of the random Legos assembled together. And you see the opening, like the window opening, it's kind of remain the same idea of the study before. And this is all the floor plans showing how they can share the one space, but in two module. Yeah, thank you.
Just a few comments about the first project. I like the way you almost frame the upholstery of the sofas or lounge chairs that you were studying. There is some details in which you can even see the subtle grain of the fabric being used, at a kind of 45-degree angle, right? Or as a kind of grid that begins to get towards the edge, and then the edge begins to have that kind of I don't know how you call that. I'm not very well versed in kind of furniture or upholstery language, but that lining or that outlining of the edge, the curvilinear edge seems an interesting thing that you made some emphasis representing on your other transformations of your lounge chair later on. I'm curious if, as you go to the later stage of the project, which I do find, pretty consistent in terms of massing and form making, that the grain of the material, in this case is concrete, but that begins to kind of present itself as a way to, begin to read or cross-read this extrusion in a slightly different way, right? That they don't necessarily are horizontal striating lines or vertical striating lines, but that begin to be perhaps present the product a little bit more playful. And perhaps, I don't know. I understand monolithic and understand concrete, and those are two things one tends to put together. But I just find the concrete expression of the project a little dated. And if I compare it back to your initial studies of the chair and the and the colors and the lining and the fabric, I just think the product gets, I don't know, it begins to get towards a kind of dated type of materiality, which I think makes perfect sense with the idea of monolith, but I think it could, you could begin to explore perhaps other notions of what that means.
Yeah, I completely agree with Maxi's comment. In that sense, let's say the lining of the project or so on is quite interesting. And I think the comment is right on spot. The monolithic presence of the project itself is quite powerful and interesting. And the way the parts are somewhat related to each other, they seem to follow more or less a script, a logic, which organizes quite well the project. Nevertheless, I agree. I'm not sure if the concrete is the way to reassure that idea, whereas I feel you have quite successfully being able to do it. I'm missing, I guess I'm missing a little bit the internal relationships of this monolith, and so somehow internal spatiality of how these parts relate, considering their own DNA, their sort of morphology, which in a way I'll bridge it to the second project. I find it's quite successful in many different moments. In a way, the sort of reinterpretation of the chair towards the massing of the project. I find this sort of abstraction is quite successful, and at the same time, it's quite successful in creating this spatial variation, which is well presented in that way. And maybe referring to Marcelo's comment a couple of projects ago on how these learning environments, or how learning environments even today have changed so much, and how it's no longer this sort of hierarchy of the desk and the sort of master of ceremonies in front of the students, but more like how the walls, how the floor, how the different surfaces, and in that way the relationship to the body and so on, has another role. And in that sense, the sort of variation this project creates, and the difference in its apertures, but also in its in its scales of height and depth and so on, I feel are quite interesting, and nevertheless you're able also to track the sort of DNA of these pieces, no, that have this possibility to join quite successfully between one another. I don't know if you discussed this before in the conversations of the other projects, but I'm quite curious about within the realm of reorganizing or restating the logic of these academic spaces, no, and the way the students relate or so on. I understand from what I've seen only from the past 4 projects, the sort of addition of the parts are what create the whole, and the whole seems to be operating in this way. Nevertheless, the exterior space seems to be quite compartmented most of the time. I'm not sure to a certain degree the idea of the sort of expanded playground, or the sort of expanded exterior space for a play or for a reunion of the students, to what level it should be completely also atomized, no, into these very small exterior pockets. I don't know if there's been a conversation around it, or if there is a reflection around is this also operating in trying to trigger or to redefine the logic of maybe what we all grew up to, which was the, I don't know, the basketball court, or the big sort of imposed space where everyone kind of relates as a whole. From what I've seen in past projects, it seems to be atomized around. I don't know if there's been a reflection, but nevertheless, both projects, I think, work very well and are very coherent with their initial reference of the furniture.
I wonder, and this is maybe a prompt to the students, like as you continue to work on and develop the projects, like the one half of the prompt, because I think everybody is taking an interesting position on the room problem, almost by necessity. And I guess your future steps will even more take you into the question of class. And I think it will be easier to take that part of the word in the next steps of the exercise seriously. Like, how does this thing start to relate to the urban situation it finds itself in? You know, how does the school situate itself? But it can already do that some, I would think, at the level of the classroom. And I would pose, like, is there a way that you can speak about the kind of class at the level of the sort of, you know, social prompt of the studio, like how this thing deals with issues of class, since you're not taking the sort of pandemic Zoom classroom seriously, so you don't have to necessarily think about the kind of distributed class, where there may be different resources for different people in their own homes. But of course that translates to the interior of the school. And I guess framing your position from this kind of political objective, like how do you begin to think about how space form geometry, the way that you're dealing with materials and connecting back to the city, how did those start to prompt a specific position to that question that you're being asked to consider? That seems like something that that we maybe haven't discussed as much today, and I wonder you know, it's a midterm, we should be talking about your projects and helping you think about them. But I also wonder if that's maybe something that colors some of your presentations in the future as you go on to continue to develop these. I thought in, wait, I'll have it, Yuxing's project, if the one thing that seems really powerful to me, could you zoom on the second from the right, bottom row? Yeah, is the ends of some of these facades where you're dealing with aperture, a kind of like moment of symmetry, things get kind of cut off a little bit short, and there's always a kind of duplicate. Those as formal operations, or the kind of interlock where one element overhangs the other. Those seem like really powerful, and maybe I'll circle it in Miro after I'm done. Oh no, wait, right, you can circle in Zoom. Forgot. So things like this or this, I think there are some interesting opportunities. Oops, let me clear, I'm done. Okay, interesting opportunities present there, both in terms of like the kinds of elevational moves, like you have something starting to materialize that like speaks out to the city, and yet you remain predominantly monolithic, which is, you know, quite your intention and a good architectural objective. But I think those things are really strange and really interesting reinventions of these kind of windows. They don't, there's another one, obviously, just to the right of that. They don't look like any kind of conventional aperture, just simply by the kind of flipping of a couple of surfaces. And I think of like Jan Santini Achel, the kind of like interior corners that you're producing in some of those spaces where you kind of flip in and out, concave and convex. And we'll send you his name in the chat. But I think there's something to be pulled forward there. And yeah, it's way too serious for a children's school would be another way to sort of position the concrete. You know, Maxi came at it as having a specific time period affiliated with it. And I wonder if like maybe it takes itself a little less seriously as a way to convert its character, that the playfulness that you have introduced in the furniture, and that doesn't mean it has to become hypercolor, but that's something that I think you could look at as you go forward.
Marcelo, can I just ask a question? Is the will there be a point at which the students start incorporating start populating their spaces? Is that part of the studio brief, or is that up to students themselves?
Sorry, I didn't get the question exactly. Like you said, start incorporating what exactly?
Is there like a formal moment in the studio where students will have to kind of populate their designs, like with scale figures, with scenarios, with inhabitants, or is that not formally specified?
We haven't really specified that. I mean, I think that the idea was that we didn't want to see people necessarily. We didn't ban it, but the range of objects, the scale of those objects, you know, from furniture to even smaller objects, you know, to the room itself, including windows, to the open spaces, it kind of should suggest that. I mean, if anything, I think what's now missing is certainly moving into the site and moving into a sense of what is the entire project going to look like. I mean, what you're seeing right now, and again, I mean, you probably were thrown into this and didn't hear my introduction of the specific of the studio, but you probably heard Florencia, and as different as it might seem, we're all dealing with like up to 8 classrooms right now. I mean, and maybe a few exterior spaces, but the program is larger. And so the question is like, what is it going to, when it's all together, what is it going to look like? And it's, you know, and I think one of the challenges, at least for now, that's, you know, it's a formal challenge, it's certainly a massing challenge, is how do you actually anticipate a sense of what the whole will look like. And so it's not just about only increments in quantity, let's say. There will also be increments in quality that might actually completely maybe change the whole configuration and so on. But I don't know, where are you going towards the question?
Well, no, because I was just thinking, like, I really like the photographs that Hermann Hertzberger took of his own school projects. And I don't know,
yes, I know
as they were being used. Yeah. And because I feel like they kind of showed like what really kind of the kinds of like interactions and events that he was really thinking about when he was kind of designing spaces. And so when you see the kids often he photographs like staircases, because that was a particular focus of his attention. And you see that the kids are like looking over the side of this staircase to the kids who are below, who are kind of looking up. And it produces a kind of very theatrical kind of structure of gazes that indicates how closely and precisely designed those spaces are to produce like social interactions among kids of very specific kinds. And I was thinking, in both of the projects, there seemed to be like a lot of kind of latencies in the spaces for how they might be used by kids. And I'm not saying like they need to be populated by scale figures, kind of not at all, but I'm just trying to imagine like actually how would kids kind of use these spaces? What kinds of group or individual experience do you like really precisely imagine the forms and masses that you've produced actually kind of creating? And I don't mean like just kind of generic population with bodies, but actually kind of really specific forms of interaction. And I just wonder about that as a way of like kind of testing what you've made with this like really sophisticated kind of formal organizational massing sensibility. And I didn't know if that means that you would have to kind of actually put figures in your images, but just as a kind of testing process to ask actually how is this space operating and what kinds of interaction am I trying to kind of produce in this school? Like what kind of a school essentially kind of is it? And to make the kind of conceptualization of your school operating as a school for kids, to bring them together in really particular ways for kind of reasons and with a rationale. I think that could be somewhere that that you could kind of move towards in your kind of development of your explanations of what you're doing. Because right now there's a lot of it that's very like kind of fixated upon the formal maneuvers, which it seems like natural and understandable. But I think there's scope to speak about what you've done also in that kind of more expansive fashion.
I mean, I think that's a really great point. It's certainly something that I will pay attention and that I would personally be interested. And I think the example of Hermann Hertzberger, that school, which we show among the precedents, especially as I mean, there's an interesting argument in that school in terms of how we will actually grow. In fact, there's all these scenarios in terms of like the school actually is a small school, but how it will actually kind of grow into a larger thing. And it's a really cheap school, it seems to me. But you're right. I mean, the way the photographs are kind of taken and so on, it's one of those things that is like, the so-called post-occupancy, I mean, or a way of like, sort of somehow the theatricality of the post-occupancy in a way to actually say, like, this is the way the architect thought about it. I mean, it's a super interesting point. I think it will definitely take a while to really think about it and find ways to do it that wouldn't seem like just sort of cheeky and overly kind of commercial, because I know what you're saying, it's not about scale figures. I do think there may be some moments, that are maybe the students kind of are aware of, you know. I mean, I think of the second project, and think of some of those moments of windows that are really too shallow for adults to kind of really be related, you know. But for kids, they might actually imply, you know, a different kind of level, you know. I don't know. I remember like the only time I taught a car studio at the CSD, and I had a student that was actually like arguing with me because she was saying that doors could be shorter than, you know, like whatever, 6'8". You know, I mean, she had a art background, I know, you know, but saying like, yeah, you could kind of lean under, and it's true. I mean, you can lean under, but there's certain things that you would not do when the code wouldn't allow you to do it. But kids, you know, kids still do it. So I don't know. I think there's maybe some interesting idea that we could actually, well, certainly, I mean, I would be interested in considering as we actually kind of expand this and make an argument that goes beyond the, you know, the sort of form or aesthetics or volume, you know, which is certainly something that we've been at least referring to when it comes to like classrooms and adjacencies. So we got to move on. We have 2 more. And so, but I think, you know, certainly the discussion is moving in different directions, which I like. So thank you guys. Okay.
I think that's me.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I was muted. Jordan and Yuxing.
Alrighty. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Micham. This is my project, The Coconut Classroom. My precedent study was The Coconut Chair by George Nelson. I tried to really pull some tactics from what he did in the design of the chair, which I really saw in the, you know, very intentional curvature and geometries, and also the overall balance of the chair. From there, I aggregated my own family of furniture and then articulated the interior space to kind of be a little bit more playful, but still kind of follow that rule of very intentional and precise geometries and curvatures. I tried to create a sort of dichotomy between the exterior and interior spaces. This was kind of my interpretation of the aggregate. I kind of wanted to highlight my interior spaces as the locations where the children are actually interacting with the built environment. And then the exterior is just supposed to serve as the role of a carrier of that interior interaction space. To kind of further emphasize this effect, I went for a more pointillistic approach to the exterior, where the facade is very pixelated along with the paving system. And they all kind of carry the same color scheme, which adds to the effect of it kind of the building rolling up out of the landscape and kind of fading away into the landscape of the rolling hills of Los Angeles. Another tactic that I used to create this dichotomy between the interior and exterior is I really wanted to frame the interior spaces so that each little interior window looked kind of like a frozen moment in space and time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Yuxing?
Yes. I'm here. Hi, everyone. My name is Yuxing. And in this project, I mainly focused on studying the form language of the lounge chair designed by Charles Amis. And then I tried to apply some features or form language to bigger scale, like interior space. I was noticed that the chair has the tendency relationship from the curves from the chair, the profile of the chair, and a kind of dynamism from the 2 pieces of cushion of the chair, which can be opened up to adjust the different sitting positions. Yes, as you can see. So there's kind of turnable plates for kids to have fun in the exterior. So in the exterior, I also try to inherit the form logic, like the roundness in the roof and the skylight, the circle shape of the second floor volume that's cantilevering over the ground to create passages for the users below, so that the canopy space, they can make full use of them. So finally, it comes to the cluster of 8 classrooms, and then from the landscape. Though in this scale, I was also trying to create the playfulness with a little bit of mysteries by creating the underground space and the platform from different elevation, so that maybe the kids can have games at a different level. Yes, that's all. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Yixin.
I definitely appreciate, Jordan, in your case, the creation of a kind of mood and atmosphere for the interior space of the classrooms, kind of setting the tone for, you know, what's foreground, what's background, the kind of subtle monochromatic scheme, very calm learning environment of the interior spaces. To me, you know, just going back to John's earlier point about what kind of schools, what kind of learning environments these are. You know, there are a lot of ways to answer that question. You know, it's not just necessarily programmatic in a quantitative way, but to me, there is perhaps the opportunity to set up the learning environment as a space that is not that distracting, that it is more muted, more monochromatic. I don't know, a space that is perhaps a little bit, you know, that takes into account the issues of distraction and interruption that exist in the current landscape of learning, given COVID and, you know, given other kind of conditions that underline in the current, you know, school population. So I appreciate those interior shots. To me, they speak a lot about what the project atmosphere will be. And I think when looking at those in comparison with the exterior, which is the project emerging from this light brown, kind of arid, deserted landscape, to me begins to make, you know, a lot of sense. I like the idea of these individual large windows that point perhaps towards the interior of a single classroom that begin to get almost crumple underneath these bigger moves or bridges, right? There seems to be, I don't know, from the point of view of an, you know, and if you think of the school as an urban landscape intervention, it seems really well calibrated in that regards. The second project, the one we saw in the end, I mean, this project to me, exquisite formally, I would say. I mean, it really amazing how you consider the issue of the growth of the school, which I think not only makes sense given the way your exercise has been set up with a kind of incremental growth from X amount of classrooms to more classrooms. But if you think of the school of as a model, as a kind of project that needs to be able to accommodate growth in terms of student population or in terms of program, right? Like schools adapt all the time to different curriculum variations in education. It seems that this project has embedded in itself the idea of both continuity but also the idea of the kind of interruption or modulation of that continuity that can begin to reflect those, you know, the modulation of a curriculum in a kind of school environment. So I think I like how playful the product is, and how you know, it's kind of exquisite in terms of form generation.
Yeah, I agree. I think both projects are really accomplished and have great qualities, and I'll like try to touch on a couple of things. I think even down to the animation, Yuxing has some really great provocations within that, where things are sort of animated into motion. And in the furniture scale, that we can start to understand that these are being potentially operated upon by their users. And in thinking again back to that issue of like class or the sort of politics of the school, you know, there's a lot of inculcating in elementary schools, like that's sort of part and parcel, you know, building citizens out of students. And I think the architecture really plays a role in that. And certainly something that I've been sort of secondhand educated on. For somebody that doesn't have children, I know way more about Montessori schools than I should, because Montessori school runs every semester that Robert McCarter teaches, and I keep going to them. So I have learned a bit about it, and the children being sort of given some agency over the space really shifts the hierarchy. So it's both part of the curricular structure of the Montessori school, and that they're sort of able to pick the tasks that they work on throughout the day, but also the kind of flexibility of the space, the fact that they can define it for themselves by moving furniture, moving mats. So I think the very fact that you're all working with furniture starts to suggest that kind of ethos might exist in all of the buildings proposals that you have put forward. But in particular, this one made me think of it given that sort of movement of them as part of the animation, and you had built-in actions. It's actually a lot like a theater, that there's the rotating platform or other various elements in the room that are made to go into motion. And so at any rate, that's something that you may even talk about to sort of situate your project in an idea of this kind of hierarchy reversal, that the students are issued agency through the way the architecture is presented. I agree with Maxi that the formal operations are really great, that you're getting these, like the ways that you're able to sort of break from the like strictest rules of the grid and produce these, like I can't believe that they're all totally confined to the grid, like these kind of indentations that exist, again, like sort of folding in multiple directions and producing both concave and convex situations, which are really helpful to you ultimately, because they produce spaces or opportunities for aperture. And I think that you're taking advantage of all of those. In Jordan's project, sorry, I'm closing my annotate, I don't want it there. So in Jordan's project, I agree, there's this like effect, it's like a weird contextualism. We maybe could have seen this in other ones earlier, but it seems like it's sort of out in Griffith Park somewhere, even though that's not where your site is, that there's this kind of like mounding on the site, that you're building a kind of artificial landscape out of the kind of geometry that you're working with. That situates us in a very different location, but one which is like related to the kind of California landscapes that surround you. And then, yes, like sort of producing larger volumes rather than feeling confined to the module, I think was a really successful introduction that becomes powerful in the partie to have this primary bridge. And I would think very carefully about how you stage the views out of those windows. And I don't care, like you could be looking at anything in the city, but I wonder if you even do. Like if we think about Sharoon, and how he thinks about the sort of age category and what their vista is out of the school. So the wall beyond the window will go up ever so high so that the view is actually the sky potentially, and that wall that is blocking from distraction. So you might think about how you tailor some kind of staging of landscape, plants, they're already in there, plants or other elements that might continue to keep that sort of focused envelope of the classroom. And then, or is it something interior that there is, again, an operable element like a curtain that might both cinch that view and then allow it to play a role. But I think they're really like super beautiful atmosphere, the kind of material suggestions in the project, all of it's really nice work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't know, Jordan, whether it's because you put that kind of bridge structure across, but I felt like I wanted to kind of flood your site, and or kind of imagine it actually situated in, like a few feet west in the actual river basin, and it also kind of made me think of, I don't know if you know that the Lawrence Halperin fountain in Portland, which involves similar kind of changes of levels, big masses, but it's kind of water coursing through it, but you can still kind of occupy it. And I think maybe why I kind of think something along those lines is because, I don't know, I think I'm kind of interested in, I don't know, schools are so problematic in terms of the way that they like kind of discipline subjects, and I don't know, all of the like politics of the LA and the US school system, and just schools like in neoliberal society, whatever, there are loads of problems. And I just feel like there's something kind of like potentially insidious about kind of design that is like beautiful, but maintains the status quo. And I wonder if there's a kind of freedom or kind of latitude that one has in a project like this, and also like thinking forward to its final manifestation of like, can you do something that's like even a little bit kind of crazy, that really doesn't happen in a school as it is, just something that would kind of shake it up and create a kind of new territory, even just as like a speculative thing to kind of drop in there that would make kind of everything different. And I just thought of the idea of kind of flooding. Also, maybe it's also because of your like pool tiles or mosaics or something that suggests that. But to think like what's really entailed when in the act of sort of destabilizing the inhabitants of a school, or kind of completely requiring different forms of navigation, like really different forms of navigation, inserting kind of exposures to elements or scenarios which are really unfamiliar to the school. And something like that might then become the basis of imagining life in a school happening very differently from the way that life tends to repeat itself in every school. Because schools are so kind of normative. There's so much homogeneity and normativity in schools and school systems. And I think the studio and the way that Marcelo has set this up especially has within it the potential to imagine something kind of really quite different from that.
I don't know, Marcelo, I don't know if you group all the projects trying to look for, I don't know, certain degree of contradiction or different ways of approaching, but I think in that sense you succeed, at least from the point of view I am looking at the project. If I compare these two, in the case of Jordan, the way in which the unit aggregate in the process, I think it produces kind of more topographical, complementary, and articulated spaces, one to another. It built a kind of like a magic blanket in which the gaps or the spaces in between the units are part of a sequence of circulation, a sequence of aggregation, a sequence of special condition that he wants to achieve. And in the case of Yuxing is not, is totally different. I think that I agree with Maxi that the way in which the form was deployed is beautiful. The aesthetic of the piece is beautiful, but it's still operating as a bunker. It didn't find the right way to be attached to the ground. It's kind of loose, still loose on the ground. I don't think that the way in which he developed those in the last three images, no, the two at the bottom and the one on the first line at the right, that the ground gives anything to the piece. I think that you have to start thinking in which way that piece would respond to the ground, how the ground would perform according to the position of the pieces. And I would use maybe another color, I wouldn't try to match both because they wouldn't match, they would never match. I said that they have to be one layer on top of the other, and you have to take them as separate entities.
I agree. I'd like to echo, and I agree, like on the general comments in the case of Jordan. What I find is so compelling is, to a certain degree, being able to take that further step of sort of reinventing or expanding the logic of the reference of the furniture itself to other possibilities within the understanding of how that furniture operates formally, so on. What I find is quite compelling is that the coherence, no, the narrative around the project and the coherence of the project, both in the ways that you have even set up the carpet and the way the carpet ends up relating to the facade itself. There's a comment which I find quite interesting, is the idea of framing, no, and creating these spaces that have their own atmosphere, that have a very intentional atmosphere. And how do you frame these spaces to be seen from the outside? No, as Constance said at a point, once it gets sort of implemented in the site, there will be a relationship from the interior to the exterior to see what the interior is framing from the exterior, no? And nevertheless, you have a platform and different ways to relate to that. At the same time, I feel to a certain degree the sort of stiffness and the coherence of your whole discourse and the way you have stitched together the project could be what sort of holds back the project itself in a further development, no? I'm not sure, and maybe going back to previous conversations, I'm not sure that maybe this protocol and understanding who is this sort of laid out for, what sort of let's say, group of students, age or so on, should operate the same way in each one of its rooms, no? So you have something there, which I feel is a way to go. The logic of your protocol, the rigidness of your protocol in understanding it from the furniture and how that expansion of the furniture ends up being, or it ends up operating at levels of atmosphere, volume, light, color, so on. Will it be uniform? No? Should it be uniform? I completely relate to the level of development this project has for a stage of midterm, no? Should it still try and operate within this logic of what you're showing us for the final stage of the project, or should it start to contradict itself, no? And what happens when you sort of create mutations or variations within this protocol that end up producing different atmospheres, different statements, and so on, no? Could these sort of micro worlds sort of clash within one another, although they come from a sort of a same conceptual DNA, sorry. So I think that could be an interesting way to make some mistakes or contradict yourself in the further stages of the project. Yuxing's project, I think it's quite obvious, I guess from Maxi's comment, no, how delicate, how sophisticated you've been able to massify your furniture reference, no? And the way you have sort of pulled it around and stitched it together, I find it super delicate, really sophisticated, quite delicious in that sense. And it ends up from the only 6 projects I've seen, creates a very interesting proposal or idea of the monolith, no? I think it's quite compelling when I read your project. Something that I really, really find interesting is the way I can no longer track the sort of addition of the pieces and the relationship of the pieces. I rather see a sort of monolith that has these sort of variations in certain moments that come from very delicate slabs and so on. And I agree with Guillermo's comment also, is that ground floor, is that platform, how is that dialogue going to be? Is it at a moment when you insert the project in the site, maybe a site gives you some clues, no, on how to lay it out. At the moment, I don't feel that the ground floor or that platform, the ground floor, operates in the same complexity of what you have been able to do with the massing itself. No, and from what I see and the way you lay out your design, I think the platform itself could be a new project, no, and could be a new complement of the project, or could be a new sort of clash of the project itself. It could work either way in a successful way, in my opinion. But both projects are. I find both projects super interesting in the way the narrative and the way they're stitched together, no, within the proposal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, this is like we got to the end of the line, and I mean, usually it'd be great to. There's a lot of things on the table. I mean, from some social connotations of how this will become other, you know, or these spaces will become other. I mean, John's suggestion, I was thinking, I mean, I didn't really want to bring it up because it's kind of an issue, you know, and having my kids in school and being in their board of advisors there, often the issue of security gets discussed, you know, and the issue of lockdown. And if you imagine like how this, you know, which is meant to be a place for education and pedagogy and related aspects of kind of personal or human growth, you know, how could it be subverted into a kind of defensive environment where you're actually really trying to incarcerate people in place, you know, and so on. So, I mean, these are issues that maybe one could consider those sort of scenarios, you know. I mean, if I'm reading correctly, I think John is sort of pointing to other things, but I mean, I think for me at least, I understand the sort of the polemic of these projects cannot escape the sort of social environment that they're implanted with, and so from the kind of ideas of build pedagogy, I mean, how much one could consider those versus ideas of like age groups and versus ideas of, you know, obviously form and discourse, and how all those things kind of come together. And I think the Hermann Herzberger or even Munkegaard, you know, by Jacobsen, or some of those examples that are actually kind of built canons, you know, in terms of when it comes to schools. And we have discussed this with students, and now going back to the side, we'll certainly sort of look back in terms of how every project begins to sort of position his or her, their own idea. So, I mean, all I can say, thank you to the jury. I know for some of you, I mean, you know, John, Europe, you know, and Juan in Colombia, Guillermo in Argentina, it's pretty late. And so thank you for sticking it out. We would love to bring you back for final, probably starting earlier. So there isn't, you know, it's not that late for you guys. Same as Constance and Maxi, who are closer to here or in here in LA. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a great comments, a lot to process. Obviously, there is a recording that students that you know will be made available for you guys, for you to kind of process, you know, all the comments and for us to discuss it together. So it's a lot for us to take in, but I think it's a good place to be in midterm. So yeah, I mean, I just want to thank all the jury. The students, you should stay for at least 5 more minutes, but thank you guys. Big shout out to actually sticking out. I know Friday night, you know, you could probably have done other things and decided to come with us here. So, I mean, at some point we'll take you out for a drink, but probably, you know, until there is a vaccine and there is one, probably, and you know, the orange person is gone, we're probably not going to have that, you know. So anyway, we'll see. So thank you again.
Nice to see you.
Thanks, Marcelo.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Weekend. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Okay, so students, let's stay for 5 more minutes, okay? Okay. Hey. So, I know you guys are probably super tired. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Marcelo, I don't know if you still want to be streaming live.
Oh, right. You're right. So maybe I should